Welcome to the April 2026 edition of the FO Exclusive. Every month, senior partner Glenn Carle, FOI senior partner Glenn Carle, who is a geopolitical analyst of some repute and retired CIA officer, and FOI is a geopolitical risk advisory, and I, the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of Fair Observer, and a partner at FOI. Every month, we analyze the key issues of the month. We sift signal from noise, and this is something we do to make sure that you understand the world better, you make sense of the world better. Today, we are speaking on, I look at my watch, around 12 noon Eastern Time, a little after 12 noon Eastern Time, Wednesday, 29 April. Last month, we focused on two issues, the dangerous implications of the new US-Israel-Iran war and big trouble in US private credit market. This month, we will shine the light only on one key issue, and that issue is US-Israel-Iran war will change the global economy and the world order. Before we dive into this issue, let us recap the key events of an eventful month. Artemis 2 flew by the moon and returned safely to Earth. Glenn follows space far more closely than me.
Yes,
he will.
I'm going to jump out of my chair on this one, and because this might be the one happy news item, arguably, that we will talk about. As everyone knows, it's the first time in 54 years that humans have left the orbit of the Earth and flown around the moon and back. This is part of a project called the Artemis Project by NASA in the United States to return humans to the moon permanently. What will happen is that within the year, there will be another test of the Artemis rocket, which is very high performing but extremely high cost and is doomed to an early death because of its cost, which I could go into. It will be succeeded by a ship called Starship and the Blue Origin and so on, but no matter. There will be another launch this year to test landing capabilities by docking in orbit of the Earth. And then in 2028 is the target date. Humans from the United States will set foot on Mars. China is projecting its landing on Mars for 2030, and they may well reach it first, the moon first, if there are any obstacles. Now, this is all happy news because it is expanding the range of human capabilities. Space programs always have substantial spin-off technology effects that affect the quality of life and economies worldwide. And it's the beginning of a whole new chapter in space exploration, but actually human capabilities. So that's the good news.
All right. Well, let's get bad news underway. Israel has passed a law that in effect makes it mandatory for Palestinians to receive a death sentence if they are convicted by a military court of deadly terrorist acts. Now, why is this important? It's important because those convicted have no right to appeal. And also remember, it's a military court. It's not a civilian court. Civil rights groups and human rights groups in Israel argue that this law is racist. They say that the language in the law implies that it could be applied to Israeli Arabs, but not to Israeli Jews. The parliament has also passed a $271 billion budget. This is Israel's biggest ever defense budget. And so there are concerns that Israel is becoming more and more of a Spartan state, wherein the Palestinians and Israeli Arabs are very much second-class citizens. More on this another time. We've already said that concerns within Israel, and Israel is a robust democracy, about this bill are high, and this bill does not do Israel's international reputation any, or this law does not do Israel's international reputation any good. Speaking of international reputation, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has suspended the renewal of its defense cooperation agreement with Israel in light of the current situation. She means the current conflict. Note that Giorgia Meloni is a right-wing, some would argue even a far-right prime minister. She has been a supporter of Israel. She has been an ally of Donald Trump, US President Donald Trump. And yet she's staying neutral in the war. She has not allowed US planes to use bases in Sicily, and she's argued for peace. So that is a major shift. And she's shifted because Italian popular opinion is against the war. Now, we move on from Italy to Spain, and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has come out very strongly against the Iran war. And not only that, he has doubled down on a left-leaning immigration agenda. He launched a scheme to offer permanent residency in Spain to 500,000 illegal migrants. The migrants must have lived in Spain for only 5 months, and they must have no criminal record. Now, supporters of this policy say, well, Spain has a declining demography. This will help Spain become a more robust economy. And opponents of the bill say that this will lead to a demographic disaster. Gradually, the Spaniards will become minority in their own country. Nevertheless, Pedro Sanchez, on the whole, is flying high. And that cannot be said for British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, who is increasingly in a hot soup. Why? He appointed...
Atul, before you get to Great Britain's current travails, the Sanchez immigration issue really is it's a major one for Spain, but it does raise an issue that merits deeper discussion at some future time, perhaps. Europe in general, most advanced democracies, countries with high standards of living in general, are suffering from the same problem, which is a demographic dearth, declining populations either already occurring or soon to occur in absolute numbers, declining population. So they're confronted with a choice, a dilemma. Unless we have more workers, the economy cannot continue to grow. As our population ages, we need people to work, to care for the aged, and to keep the economy going, and to generate tax revenues.
Have a tax base.
Agents,
exactly.
Pensions. And the only solution to that is immigration. So there's a dilemma that all advanced economies are facing, and it is a significant one.
And at the same time, immigration is not a painless phenomenon. It raises issues of assimilation. It also raises the specter of clash of cultures, if not necessarily a civilization. So it has its own problems, as we know, by the phenomenon of the rise of far-right parties, as well as increasing rhetoric against immigration in many European nations. And let's get to Britain. The UK, the United Kingdom. British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer is in increasingly hot soup, as I said. He appointed Lord Peter Mandelson as ambassador to America. This has come back to haunt him. The Dark Lord, or the Prince of Darkness, as Mandelson was fondly called by the British press, was a key architect of New Labour, along with Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Sadly, he had too many dodgy friends. Some included folks in China and Russia, and one of them was an American, and he was a certain Jeffrey Epstein. The Starmer government has sacked Sir Oliver Robbins for this disaster. Apparently, the Foreign Office, in Starmer's version, did not tell him that Mandelson had failed security clearances. Now, Robbins is telling another story. He told a parliamentary committee that there was a very very strong expectation from the Prime Minister's office to rush the process of security clearance for Mandelson's appointment. So what we have now is a full-blown political crisis. The Labour Party is losing popularity. Labour MPs are restive, and talk of defenestrating Starmer is now rife in London. Also, there's a lot of talk in the UK about Britain being in peril. In fact, Lord George Robertson has said so. And he has said so because he blames the Starmer government's corrosive complacency for ignoring his recommendations or the review he did of Britain's defence forces. And Lord George Robertson is a former NATO Secretary General. So the UK is facing many crises, from rising inflation to high debt to bond yields going up. And in addition to all of these things, Britain's chief rabbi, Ephraim Mirves, has warned that a sustained campaign of violence against Jews was gathering momentum. Apparently 9 people were arrested for.
Now, the chief rabbi is not imagining things at all, and not that anyone should imagine that he would, but his comments should resonate and be taken seriously, paid attention to by people everywhere. This is not just a Great Britain issue where anti-Semitism in Great Britain is rising, although it is, but the documentation showing dramatic increases, sustained increases over years of anti-Semitism in most countries, and in the United States notably, is shocking.
Yeah.
Not just comments, acts of violence.
Yeah. In fact, anti-Semitism is experiencing a dramatic record high surge globally, particularly following the October 7, 2023 attacks. Data shows a nearly 350% increase in US incidents alone over the past 5 years. Apparently, 9,300 incidents were reported in 2024. In Britain, the reason the chief rabbi was complaining is because 9 people were arrested for planning an attack on an unknown Jewish target, and this was one of many recent incidents. American Jewish Committee's The State of Anti-Semitism in America 2025 report chronicles rising physical attacks and online vitriol against Jews. In the 2 years, quote, in the 2 years since October 7, an overwhelming number of American Jews feel less safe. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, the important point, I mean, that's an important point, but the explanation generally will be taken to associate the rise of anti-Semitism with the actions of the Israeli government, which many may criticize, and the conflation of anti-Israeli political positions with anti-Semitism. That is a real phenomenon, and as Israel has become the dominant imperious power in the region, one can understand that there would be a shift, a loss of sympathy for Israel and towards the downtrodden. However, there's a deeper issue concomitant with that is occurring worldwide, and that's something we've all seen, which is the rise of the far right, or if you don't want to characterize it that way, of the nativist, nationalist, right cultural and political parties in advanced democracies, in part because of the demographic issues that we talked about a moment ago, largely because of economic stresses from globalization, and because of dramatically large percentages, historically so, in advanced economies of immigration. So there's a nativist reaction, so that the people look to the other as something that is to be is viewed as hostile and dangerous. And the Jews have always been part of the other.
But here's the important thing, is our sources in the UK, in France, in Germany, and the Netherlands speak about very high anti-Semitism amongst immigrant Muslim communities. In fact, that is a major problem for them because these Muslim communities identify with the Palestinian cause. They believe their fellow Muslims are being oppressed. They believe that they live in an apartheid state. And therefore, they often, in radical mosques, come to believe that attacks on Jews happen to be justified. So it is not just the far right, Glenn. It is many Labour voters. It is many voters of all the left-leaning parties in Europe who are quite anti-Semitic.
That's a very important point. And you put your finger on something else too, though. One should be aware that many of the Muslim immigrants come from societies where, in fact, that perhaps all of them, that's not true, but many, where it is during, say, Ramadan, illegal for a non-Muslim to eat in public, and where one may not enter any religious establishment if one is not a Muslim. And this is just the way society is organized and the laws are. And so that's transposed in sort of a reverse framing by immigrants coming to non-Muslim societies, and that creates tensions.
Yeah. I mean, one data point there, the French intelligence have been, and indeed British intelligence, MI5, have been particularly concerned about preachers in certain mosques who have been, shall we say, brewing a toxic brew. And so this is, to repeat, not just a far-right phenomenon. It's not just a few people on the far right. This is a phenomenon that is sweeping society at large. And here, immigration has proved to be no solution. Immigration hasn't led to people becoming more tolerant and necessarily more benign. So identity politics.
It's not just the French intelligence service. Who has detected this in France. I mean, this has been a problem for decades. The Saudi government spent many billions of dollars over 50 years, especially since 1979, when the Mecca was seized by jihadists. And part of the deal was between the Saudi government and the clerics that the Saudi government agreed to finance proselytization of the Wahhabi sect of Islam, which is extremely conservative. And so many of the textbooks and the trained clerics disseminate or propagate, whatever term one wishes to use, a version of Islam that is grossly anti-Semitic and intolerant of any difference at all. And that's just a fact. And that has affected the framework of perception and belief of many Muslims worldwide. Now, the Saudis have, Glenn, under pressure after 9/11, backed away some from financing all of that, but this remains a generational issue.
Glenn, correct me if I'm wrong. Your former organization, the CIA, analyzed Wahhabi influence all the way from Bosnia to Indonesia. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that, am I correct in my assumption?
It's a central part of our work, and there was an explicit agreement between the royal family in Saudi Arabia. The clerics would support the legitimacy of the Saudi royal family in exchange for the Saudi government then financing madrasas, schools worldwide, and the training of clerics worldwide with the Wahhabist version of Islam, which is quite hostile to any deviation from their own interpretation of the Quran and the refusal to accept anything that is not from that. And that's part of the reason for 30 years there's been the issue of jihadism.
All right. So we move on from anti-Semitism to another country closely linked to Britain, and that is India. In India, Narendra Modi is in similar trouble to Keir Starmer. He was playing football in an embarrassingly amateurish way in Sikkim recently to try and gain votes in West Bengal, because West Bengal seems to have a love for the beautiful game, unlike most of India. But all of that cannot detract from a politically embarrassing defeat. For the first time, a government bill was voted out by Parliament. Now, this is important to register, because India has a parliamentary democracy. Governments command a majority in the lower house of the parliament. A prime minister is in office only if he or she commands the confidence of the Lok Sabha, the lower house of the parliament. And generally, governments don't table bills if they think they won't get through, even if they are coalition governments. There are consultations, discussions, etc. The last time the government, a sitting government, lost a bill in the Lok Sabha was 2002. So only twice this century. And I hope I'm right. If I'm wrong, we will do further research. This is something that I looked up in a hurry, but apparently the last time a sitting government lost and failed to get a government bill through was 2002. Now, why is this defeat very important? Because the government was tabling amendments that would have increased the seats in the lower house of parliament from 543 to 850. This would have decreased the political power of the south. And the regional and linguistic divisions in India are back in play. Now, let's move on to Canada. Canada, Mark Carney seems to be doing well. Mark Carney's Liberal Party has secured a small majority in the House of Commons after winning 3 special constituency elections. Under Carney and his predecessor, Justin Trudeau, the Liberals have run a minority government so far. They managed to rule Canada with coalition partners. Now they have a majority in Parliament. The Carney government has also created a Canada Strong Fund, the first for the country. This fund will invest in energy, infrastructure, mining, agriculture, and technology. The fund will have an initial corpus of 25 billion Canadian dollars, that is $18.4 billion as of today. It's a broader strategy by Carney to boost Canada's economy in face of US tariff threats. This fund, this investment fund, will invest in combination with the private sector. The focus will be nation-building projects such as port upgrades and natural resource development. Obviously, the opposition has criticized the move. They make the argument, or opposition politicians make the argument, that unlike Norway, Canada is in debt, meaning its sovereign wealth fund will not be paid for by revenues but by borrowed money. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has called it a sovereign debt fund. Maybe so, but there's something innovative about this fund. The Carney government will allow Canadians to pay directly into the new fund, and this practice doesn't exist in other countries with similar funds. So Canada is doing something right. You like Mark Carney. He played ice hockey for Harvard, just like you. So, and he's an Oxford man on top.
Kind of wisdom.
Let's move on to Takaichi Sanae, the Japanese prime minister. In a major move, she said Japan would relax restrictions on weapons exports to open up the defense industry's trade with foreign countries. She said, quote, "No single country can now protect its own peace and security alone." Note that Sanae sparked a row with China by suggesting that Japan would respond if Taiwan was invaded. Obviously, Beijing has said it would resist Japan's new form of militarism. Those of you interested in China-Japan tensions can read my long article. We've covered it. Glenn and I have covered this for a while, and I wrote a piece which Glenn reviewed. Moving on from Japan,
if I may, Atul, yeah. I know we're anxious to get onto our Israel-Iran-U.S. dance. However, what does Mark Carney's Sovereign Wealth Fund for Canada and Sanae Takaichi's policy of now allowing and fostering Japanese arms sales outside of Japan have in common? Well, they have quite a lot in common, actually. Both of them are signs of this radically, dramatically, rapidly changing world we're living in, and the recession, the withdrawal or decline of American influence, frankly. The sovereign fund is a transparent effort, and I'm not passing judgment on it, to insulate Canada a little bit from Wall Street and from Washington, and to try, as a country 1/10 the size of the United States can, to diversify and to insulate itself from American capriciousness. So that's one. And the Japanese move is yet another sign that Japan has now really become, finally after World War II, a fully mature independent state. And it's by necessity, because there too can Japan count on the United States security umbrella, and for certain. And one should always count on oneself first under any circumstance. And the Japanese now think the answer is probably no, they can't. And so this is a step towards sovereignty and to trying to fill the gaps that the United States is creating.
And now we'll briefly discuss a political earthquake in Europe. Something major happened in the centrist TISA party, which is a new party, mind you, won 2/3 of the seats in Hungary's election, ousting long-standing Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his populist right Fidesz party. Orban had been in power for 16 years. He had run an increasingly authoritarian and corrupt regime. Peter Magyar was actually a member of Orban's party who campaigned against corruption, who campaigned for the rule of law. Apparently he drove in his beat-up car through villages all around the country. Not only did he start a new party, but he won it. And the interesting thing about this election is it's not any of the establishment parties that won it, or the old establishment parties, not of the left, not of the right, but a new centrist party that wins the election. And it wins particularly on governance and competence issues. And a lot of people talked about apathy in European politics. But one thing we have to give Peter Magyar, for one thing, we have to give Peter Magyar his due. He was able to energize Hungary, mobilize voters, and get them not just out to vote, but also to celebrate. And now, of course, comes the hard part. He has promised to improve governance, promised, of course, to improve rule of law, clamp down on corruption. He's talked about improving relations with the EU. The EU will release a bunch of money. This is not good news, of course, for Russia, because Viktor Orban and Vladimir Putin were rather close. And in fact, a leaked telephone call of Viktor Orban's foreign minister speaking very obsequiously to Sergei Lavrov, Russia's foreign minister, harmed Viktor Orban greatly. J.D. Vance showed up to campaign for Viktor Orban. That didn't help much either. And now we have Peter Magyar, who is determined to improve relations with the EU, who has taken away the veto that Hungary had over EU money going to Ukraine, and now we have a completely new political landscape in Hungary and in Europe.
Fundamentally, what this is that the Hungarian people's will has finally triumphed. The Hungarians have been a majority hostile to Orban for years and years, but he has fiddled with the election results and suppressed the media and jailed and destroyed any opponent. at all, and this is a victory for the Hungarian people
I mean,
and a loss for
to
Moscow.
be
The
fair,
government
to be fair,
of Orban was
Glenn,
largely a pawn of Moscow.
Glenn, Orban was no Recep Tayyip Erdogan. He hasn't jailed as many people. And I think, yes, he's controlled the press. Yes, he has been corrupt. But the fact that Peter Magyar could run a grassroots campaign, and the fact that he won a two-thirds majority, and the fact that Orban conceded quickly shows that Hungary
To everybody's surprise,
is a democracy.
Well, it
And
remains.
so,
It remains by the skin of its teeth. It did succeed. That is true. Most of the
yeah.
organs of democracy were being, if not frayed, had been suppressed or broken. So I don't have any. There are no kind words that one can say to mitigate the consequences of and the subservience of Orban to Moscow.
Yeah. Now that we have touched upon the key issues, let's get to the meat of the matter, or the heart of the issue, or the heart of our episode. The US-Israel-Iran war will change the global economy and the world order. What do we have right now? We have a double blockade. The Iranians have blocked the Strait of Hormuz, and the US Navy has decided to blockade ships coming into Iranian ports. So it's now become an economic war of attrition. Negotiations are off and on. They are being held in that wonderful state of Pakistan, which, of course, is the Switzerland of negotiations. As we are all aware. Imran Khan is still in jail. Hey ho, there we go. It doesn't matter though. Field Marshal Asim Munir is Donald Trump's favorite field marshal, and we have negotiation ninjas like Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner representing America in negotiations with wily Iranians. And so the facts on the ground are that we are in a frozen conflict as of now. Donald Trump has extended the ceasefire, but troop buildup continues. Israel continues to strike targets in in Lebanon. Continues to strike Hezbollah targets. It has moved its troops up to the Litani River. And so, Glenn, over to you. What is the meaning of all of this? Where do you foresee this issue turning? Or this issue
one's
going?
tempted to say that since the Iranians have a blockade, that Donald Trump wanted one himself, so he decided to blockade the blockade. But it is a measure of pressure, short of invasion and short of actually throwing in the towel and going home. Because Donald Trump has put himself in the United States and much of the world in a very awkward position. No one wants Iran to control the straits, and everyone is horrified at the prospect of, frankly, invading Iran. And so what does one do? A blockade of the blockade, it does increase pressure on Iran. But what's likely to happen? So all of us will have heard about the 15-point plan of the United States and the 10-point plan proposed by Iran, although no one has seen parts of these plans. But that doesn't really matter. And what we have seen through public statements and then the text of the proposals themselves is that these are opening gambits, and the fact that there was only one day of negotiation that then stopped, no one should really read too much into. Of course, you weren't going to end a war with unsolvable substantive problems and issues for both sides in a day, and negotiations never conclude until they must. So this is just an opening gambit. There will be a solution, and the truth is, it's, I think, relatively clear the broad makings of it. It's probably true that Iran cannot sustain for months the economic stresses that it is under, and the United States could, but politically cannot sustain the cost, literal cost of supporting deployed forces in the region indefinitely. And the world, as you will talk about in a moment, Atul, economically certainly doesn't want to and should not have to sustain the progressive damage occurred by the closure of the straits. So a deal is probably likely, a solution, a resolution, not a solution, a resolution, which will resemble the agreement called JPCOA between the United States,
JCPOA,
other European JPCOA. What did I say? Whatever.
JCPOA.
Yeah, which is the nuclear agreement between the United States, other European powers, and Iran, which stopped really Iran's nuclear weapons development program, allowed international inspectors to go to the relevant sites in Iran in exchange for some easing of sanctions and slow reintegration of Iran into the world economic order. I suspect that this is likely the direction that an agreement will reach, but probably inferior from the non-Iranian perspective to that which Donald Trump destroyed. And I would anticipate Iran will probably make some statement saying, yes, we pledge not to develop nuclear weapons for a period of time. We welcome inspectors so long as they can affirm, even indirectly, the principle of Iran's right to have nuclear research conducted. And in exchange for that, the straits will open and matters will return more or less to the status quo ante the U.S.-Israeli attack, except that much of Iran's conventional military projection capabilities will have been destroyed. But they were not a threat before. There are only two ways that Iran could project its power before the attack, the war, and one was missiles. Half of the missiles have probably been destroyed in a lot of sites now, and one was through surrogates, and they've been severely damaged, not destroyed, but severely damaged by Israel. So that's the likely conclusion, because the alternatives are almost impossible to consider.
Glenn, I'm not so sure I entirely agree. I think the consequences, and let's begin with the economic consequences, are going to last much longer than the Trump administration. Number one, this is a supply-side shock, which we have not seen since the 1970s. In fact, this month we had the annual World Bank IMF annual meetings here, and people said this is the biggest supply-side shock ever. And the people saying this were some of the most seasoned investors and the most seasoned central bankers, and neither of these lot are particularly stupid or naive. And so what do we mean by supply side shock? Now, those of you listening to us, if you want a copy of our briefing, we have two briefings, one on the scenarios of the Iran war, and Glenn and I went through it in our last video, and two, which our managing partner Sanjay Acharya and our partner Manu Sharma have worked really hard, and they have a lot of brilliant ideas, and both of them are very sound quantitatively. They've crunched numbers. It's about how this will affect the resource architecture, the financial architecture, and the security architecture in years to come. And so rather than drowning you with data, which we could, let me paint you a very, very, very quick overview of what is happening. We know that the UAE has left, or it will be leaving, or is leaving, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, after almost 60 years. Now, on surface, this is not a big deal. The UAE was OPEC's fourth largest producer, 3.4 million barrels per day, 12% of the oil cartel's total production. In any case, the UAE was dissatisfied with Saudi Arabia. and OPEC was a cartel, and the breaking of that cartel is good news in the long run. But the important thing to note is that if the UAE has left OPEC, and that has considerable risks, then it means that the UAE was under tremendous strain. And obviously, the UAE is unhappy with OPEC's production quotas. It wants to pump more. Saudi Arabia, which is the informal leader, if not the formal leader of OPEC, wants UAE to pump less. Why? Because some Saudis need oil to be $80 to $100 per barrel to balance their books, whilst the Emiratis can make a profit at a lower price of $55 to $65 a barrel. Now, the budget or the budgetary situation of all Gulf or nearly all Gulf states isn't pretty right now. The blocking of the Strait of Hormuz has led to, number one, a lack of revenues through exporting oil and gas and petroleum products and industrial inputs, whether it is helium, whether it is sulfur, whether it is aluminium as well. So a lot of these commodities would go all the way to China and Japan and South Korea and Taiwan. That's not happening. So even semiconductor production is suffering, because guess who was supplying a lot of helium? Qatar. That's not happening. So there's a massive supply side shortage. Our industry sources in Asia tell us that forget about the financial prices, forget what you see on the screen, forget what you see on the ticker. The real prices they have to pay for physical delivery are a lot higher than the prices that are appearing on screens in financial markets. In fact, sometimes they are paying a premium of 20%. So spot delivery prices are 20% over prices in financial markets. Now, this is important because it shows the price mechanism of financial markets is now failing, because they are probably being driven more by algorithms, by considerations of interest rate rises or falls, and less by real world conditions. Anyway, that may be so, but the importance is that if you look at differential in prices across the world, jet fuel in Asia costs over $200 per barrel. This is about $40 higher than in North America. And as we said, the shortages of commodities is real. Look at the shortage of aluminium cans. You cannot buy Diet Pepsi in India anymore. Look at the shortages of cooking gas cylinders. Basically, LPG is used for cooking all across South Asia. Pakistan.
So the macro point is?
The macro point is that these countries have a massive shortage of supply, and inputs, so their outputs are going down. Because outputs are going down, you have inflation in the economy. Because you have inflation, you have demand destruction. And a lot of these countries will no longer be buying dollars. These dollars that they would buy were paid to Gulf countries for exports. The Gulf countries would then circulate it back into Western economies in stock markets, in bond markets, in private equity, in venture capital, in investment in AI. So you could say that just as you have the Gulf Stream current that flows from the Gulf of Mexico northwards along the East Coast and then flows through Northern Europe, moderating everything, you had a Gulf Stream current in the financial world. And this time money flowed from the Persian Gulf. And now that Gulf Stream current has not just stopped, it is even reversing, even if temporarily. So the UAE has asked for dollar swap lines with the US. The UAE, of course, is betting more on the US and Israel as providers of security. But the important thing here is, instead of the flow of capital in the global economy coming from the Gulf, keeping asset prices up, now we have a reverse Gulf Stream, and there is real risk of contagion spreading from the real economy to financial markets, because whenever there is a disconnect, we believe that the real economy underlies the financial markets. Financial markets influence the real economy, but ultimately financial markets have to reflect the real economy. In the 2007-2008 crisis, we saw they were out of sync. Mortgages were going to ninjas, no income, no jobs, but the market was frothy in the run-up to 2007-2008. Markets are still frothy, and this correction is inevitable. And so economically, our argument is the resource architecture now changes, and the financial architecture will change too. So the petrodollar, that will face a challenge. Iran is already charging toll in yuan, euros, and cryptocurrencies. India is buying Russian oil. Other people are buying Russian oil. They are not using the dollar anymore. They are using a mix of UAE dirhams, rubles, whatnot. So these are major tectonic shifts, and it'll be really difficult to bolt the gates after the horse has bolted. So that is what we foresee. And just to give you some figures, the deficits of various countries range anything from 2.9 billion to 20.6 billion. And these Gulf countries run very generous welfare states, and they have been unable to cut down expenses in this crisis. So economically, this is a major event. And this will have implications for security too, because, as you said, the Europeans are now looking to have their own security. We have had Chancellor Friedrich Merz talk about America being embarrassed by Iran. We've had comments by Emmanuel Macron, French president. We've seen the sentiment in Europe. So increasingly, the Europeans will rely less on the US. As we talked earlier, is going to export arms. So the American security architecture, wherein everyone relied on America as providing global security as a global public good, and unfurling Pax Americana across the world, that will suffer. So we will see these massive tectonic shifts. And in the Gulf as well, we will see pressures. Bahrain is facing a lot of pressure. Bahrain is a Sunni dynasty ruling over a largely Shia population. We hear reports that members of its royal family are decamping with their assets to Europe. That is a signal. We hear intensifying relationship between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Pakistan could provide the soldiers for Gulf monarchies to keep their restive populations in control should a second Arab uprising emerge. So lots will change. Lots is changing. Over to you, Glenn, because you have a lot of predictions and you have some positive ones, particularly pertaining to green energy and nuclear energy.
Well, that could be the silver lining. If one has to, we must always look for a silver lining. So I think we can look at there will be some resolution to the current impasse between really the United States and Iran. And the straits will open again. Whatever the form that the solution negotiation takes in the end is frankly important as it is frankly secondary to the global changes that Atul was touching upon. Economically, it's a huge supply side shock, but it'll have lasting significance, not just on current economic activities and strains on each country's annual budget. The Gulf state economies will take lasting hits, and at best their growth rates will slow. If not, we will see them go into a relative tailspin that was otherwise completely avoidable.
Glenn, very quickly, if I can jump in, bankers and lawyers and all sorts of financial services providers in London and Singapore are very bullish that Dubai will never be the same again. As one person from Dubai, one investor from Dubai whom I met last week said that we thought we were Switzerland and we've discovered we are not. And so capital and talent is going to probably end up in London despite the higher taxes and the political malaise. And of course, Singapore, because they are safer places to do business and the geopolitical risk of living and working in those places is much lower.
Right. Well, I would agree that I'll get to my cent and a half on that in just a second. But the one silver lining may be that the global transition to renewable energies, the turn away ultimately long-term, strategically, structurally, forever from petroleum-based energy will accelerate. And whereas projections by the IAEA and other, the UN and so on, have been looking to have renewables the dominant producer of electricity globally by 2035. The assessments now are, because of the fighting in the war and the blockage of the straits, that will accelerate by 5 or a half dozen years, which is really, really quite dramatic. Which does not indicate good news for the Gulf states, since they all exist on oil. Globally, that would be a good thing to have happen, of course, and it will happen, and now probably more quickly. Strategically, to your point, Atul, yeah, well, what we're finding is it's tough to have Iran as a neighbor, and Singapore doesn't, and Switzerland doesn't, but the Gulf states do, and so they're in trouble now because of this. And Iran is coming out of this conflict with more influence in the region, actually. And globally, even through the threats to the straits than it had before, which is a little ironic, but the United States seems to extend Iranian influence with each invasion of a Middle Eastern country. So it's a strategic loss.
Iraq was a godsend for Iran. I mean, you were involved in the war on terror. You know that part of the world well. That was fantastic for Iranian proxies to take over at least the Shia part of Iraq.
That's absolutely, absolutely. So it's a strategic loss for the United States, and that's, you can say, well, what does that even mean? Well, if Iran is more influential and you are hostile to Iran, and you are less influential, and other states are less inclined to follow your lead, then that has all sorts of ramifications economically, politically, and so on. The Iranian regime remains in power, and it's gone from being a theocracy run by the mullahs with strong influence by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards to fundamentally a regime, a garrison state, a military state run by the Iranian Revolutionary Guards with mullahs as, if not puppets, figureheads, which is not to anyone's interest except for the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. So Iran
very quickly, if I can support your argument, the IRGC followed a mosaic strategy, decentralized control, and now the IRGC commanders are empowered. They have tasted blood. They have tasted real power in a military conflict. They are also now exercising powers of revenue by extorting ships or charging toll fees through or trying to charge toll fees from every ship passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is a very dangerous precedent, because let's say tomorrow Iran does become democratic, and when you have a democratically elected leader, as you do even in the US, taxing your own citizens is hard, but imposing tariffs or toll fees becomes easy. So whether tomorrow Iran's government is royalist or communist, democratic or theocratic, or indeed a garrison state, a term coined by our friend Ishtiaq Ahmed, the Pakistani author, academic, social scientist, historian. We will have Iran or Tehran seeking geopolitical rent from the Strait, and it puts into question the principle of freedom of navigation of the seas. It puts into question the entire rules-based order, freedom of trade, yada, yada, yada. So this has major consequences. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, well, it's the realization in a specific place of what many of us, certainly I, have been talking about for years, which is the destruction of this normative order, rules-based order, and its replacement by regional power zones, which is not to anyone's benefit, certainly not globally. A strategic beneficiary, so the U.S. is a strategic loser in all of this. The strategic beneficiary is likely to be already China, because if nothing else, the acceleration of the transition to renewable energy sources and means of locomotion, as in EV cars, will be dramatically accelerated. And China dominates the market and is years ahead technologically of any rival, to their credit. And this will continue.
Chinese, just to add to that, Chinese solar panel companies, Chinese electric vehicle companies, Chinese battery companies, all of them are doing spectacularly well after this conflict. Demand for all of them have gone up. In fact, even in the US, Tesla's sales went up by 17% this quarter as compared to the same quarter last year. So this is a very good time for solar technology, battery technology, electric vehicles, and all that jazz.
One of the arguments by conservatives against electric vehicles has been that they cost so much. And there are two ways to look at this. One, the upfront cost has been higher initially for a purchaser of an EV than an equivalent internal combustion engine traditional car. Up to now, that's almost no longer the case. But the net expense of owning an EV is substantially less, and it has been for several years, substantially less than owning the equivalent internal combustion engine car. So now the economics are, frankly, more than compelling already to have an EV rather than a traditional car. So China will benefit. Militarily, because I don't want to go on too long here, well, once again, who's a big loser in this? And it's NATO. And it's not really because of anything Iran has done. It's because of what Donald Trump, as the president of the United States, has done. He's made alliances objects of insult only. And
ridicule.
Ridicule. Europe has quite clearly taken drawn its conclusions about the reliability of the United States and what it should do to meet its own existential issues. And so you see defense budgets going up, intra-European coordination increasing, arms production increasing, and agreements being discussed and implemented. So France is now extending its nuclear umbrella to Europe, as the United States had done for 75 years. So NATO is nearly torn apart. It will struggle to continue as an effective organization so long as the views of Donald Trump and his acolytes have much sway in the United States, which is possibly for the foreseeable future.
Very quickly, what is happening in NATO is mirrored in East Asia as well. The South Koreans, the Taiwanese, and the Japanese are talking together a lot more. They have been dismayed that the Asia pivot, which Barack Obama promised, never arrived. The US is yet again trapped in the Middle East. The US has withdrawn troops from Japan and indeed military equipment from the Far East, South Korea included, and sent it off to this war with Iran. So there is increasingly plunging confidence in American ability to come to the rescue of Taiwan or South Korea or Japan. And so Europe is saying out aloud what East Asians are saying in private. So the alliance structure of the US is under threat.
And thus we see part of the pudding of proof is that Japan is now aggressively starting to develop once again its indigenous arms industry and sales. And then finally, the point I would make is that the consequences of this conflict really are the same ones that we are seeing in Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is the clear primacy of drones and automated weaponry in warfare. They are not just ascendant but triumphant over heavy armor, over infantry. They give a strong advantage at present to defensive forces. In naval combat, the pride of America's military and the way it projects its power militarily is its aircraft carriers. I am not a naval expert, but to me, this indicates the decline of capital ships in naval warfare. If you can threaten a ship with a $20,000 drone, or maybe $20,000 drones, but the ship costs $6 or $12 billion and has 6,000 men aboard, and that ship has to now operate 1,500 kilometers away from the area that it seeks to influence. That's a revolution already in the warfare.
Glenn, very quickly, I'll jump in. I'll jump in with a quote from our friends, engineers at MIT, who've worked on a lot of defense kit or military kit. They have said repeatedly that our equipment is brittle and expensive, and times may have moved on. So there has been a concern amongst engineers working on these extremely expensive systems that the US needs to be more nimble, and the US needs to have other technologies. And what you're saying about aircraft carriers is something they have talked about, almost everything from planes to radars.
Well, you can buy, these figures are pretty accurate. You can buy 50 drones that perform, say, at 80% of the capability of one Tomahawk missile for the price of one Tomahawk missile. So if your defenses are wonderful, 98% effective, you can destroy 49 of those 50 inferior drones, but you're still destroyed. And that's the dynamic that we are living now. So it's a revolution in military technology, and I think it implies a dramatic rise in the relative power of regional militaries at the expense of superpowers. It also should give pause to Beijing about trying to invade Taiwan, I would think. So the Iran attack by Donald Trump is turning out to be globally, historically significant.
So we can expect a new global economy and a changed world order. On that note, we will see you next month in May. Have a lovely start to your summer. Until then.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.